Hey Joelle, good to be back with you. Wanted to give you some invitations today. The first is tomorrow night. If you are watching this on a Sunday, if you're watching this on a Tuesday, then ignore everything I'm about to say. But Monday, October 3rd, football game at David Foley's house. Monday Night Football with some great barbecue. Get there between 5 and 5:30 for the game. After a day of work, you're gonna love having a great time with these guys. So make sure that you are there. The next thing is next week, Wednesday, October 12th, is Joelle Kids at Tyson Rec Center. Pre-registration is not required anymore, but we want to make sure your kiddos are there. So mom, dad, put the reminder in your phone. Make sure you get them there so they can keep learning out of the book of Joshua with us. This is our last lesson out of the book of Joshua for them as we're coming to a close really shortly here in the next week. But Pastor Alex Lessler is a friend of mine, and he is here today to speak with us. He's an adult ministry pastor at Beaverton Foursquare. Him and his wife, Fallon, have 4 daughters, and they are just a wonderful couple who've lived in the area for quite some time. Alex and I have overlapped a little bit, having been through Evergreen Christian Center, which is a Foursquare church, and then now him being at Beaverton and Dwell being a Foursquare church. So we cross paths quite frequently, and I'm grateful for him and just his kindness and his humility. He's just a really wonderful leader, and I'm so grateful that he said yes to speaking to all of us out of Joshua chapter 23. Like I said, we only have one more chapter in Joshua. We're coming to a close, but Alex is going to tackle Joshua 23 for us today. So thank you so much for giving Alex your attention, and here he is, my very good friend, Alex.
Well, hi, Dwell Church. My name is Alex, and as Lydia introduced me, I just also wanted to take a moment and introduce myself. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to be here with you guys through this video format. In so many ways, you as a church have been pioneering a fresh way to gather, and I've been learning from you from afar. So when Lydia reached out to me as she was on maternity leave and asked me to be a part of this, I was so incredibly excited. I've been friends with Lydia for a few years now. We've shared some denominational contexts and some roles within the denomination. I've known about her longer than I've had the privilege of getting to be her friend. But I would say that you have a stellar pastor and a wonderful person. And I'm so, again, privileged and honored to get to be here. We also previously shared a context together. She worked at Evergreen Christian Center out in Hillsboro. I also was a pastor out there for a period of time. We did not serve at the same time. We just missed each other, but we served in very similar roles under the same leaders. And so I also know that she comes to you guys incredibly gifted, talented, but also has been equipped and poured into for years, and so incredibly thankful for her. I have a deep admiration for what your church is doing and the people that you're reaching in South Hillsboro and beyond. And I just wanted to say that it's so great to get a chance to speak with you. A little bit about me. I'm a local Oregonian. I have been born and raised in the Portland metro area. I've lived on the east side. I've lived in downtown Portland, and for the last decade or so, I've been on the west side of Portland. I am a husband, and my dear and lovely wife, Fallon, like Jimmy Fallon or Fallon, Nevada. Fallon has been my bride for about 12 years. I'm a dad to 4 daughters. Scarlett is my oldest. She's 8 years old. Isla is 5. Lennon is 3. And Merritt, my youngest, is 1 years old. And I've been a pastor for just about 15 years. And that entire time, I have been in the Portland metro area. I love the local church, and I'm passionate about sharing Jesus with the world. I also am given the opportunity today to continue our teaching series through the book of Joshua, and I'm thrilled. This is really exciting. I have been teaching here at Beaverton Foursquare Church, which is the church I've been a part of now for 8 years. I'm on a pastoral staff there, and recently we've been teaching through the New Testament letter, Romans. And so the opportunity to take some time and really study and learn from what God was doing in the Old Testament, particularly through the book of Joshua, was really exciting. And so, so I have the privilege of getting to do that. So if you have a Bible, I would encourage you to go ahead and open it. We're going to be in Joshua chapter 23. We're going to spend quite a bit of time just in the first few verses. And I'm going to share some things about discipleship with you. I see a pattern of discipleship in the life of Joshua that really is consistent throughout the entirety of the Bible. And so we want to look at a framework of discipleship through the life of Joshua. And we'll spend the majority of our time in the first few verses. And then as time goes on, we'll get to the end and we'll kind of bring this whole message to a final point. So if you have a Bible, again, Joshua 23, verse 1 is where we are going to start. By this point in this series, you guys should have a very good grasp on the book of Joshua. And so much of what I'm going to say here in the beginning, I think it's just going to be refresher for you. In verse 1, it says this: "After a long time had passed, and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them." So why do you think this detail is added? Like, why would it be necessary? Again, this is a book written to a group of people that existed and lived at the time it was being written. I think that the reason why this has been added, a long time had passed, the Lord had given Israel rest from their enemies, is because the people of God, we need reminders. It is, in fact, one of the most repeated commands in all of the Bible to remember. We know this is true, that we need reminders because of our own experiences. Like if you were to ask me what I had for breakfast 2 days ago, I would not be able to tell you. With 4 kids and all the things that happen in life, the pace of life moves relatively quickly. But on the bigger things of life, besides just what I had for breakfast a few days ago, I am prone to, and I'm sure you can resonate with this, forget. Forget the things that God has done. And the danger of that is when we forget what God has done in our life, when we forget what God has been faithful to do throughout human history, we can be filled with fear, we can be paralyzed by that fear, and not have the courage to trust Jesus moving into the next season, which is exactly why Joshua's life starts with a command from God to be strong and courageous. It's also why this book ends with Joshua telling the people of God to also be strong and courageous, because we need a reminder of the things God has done. This is one, again, the most repeated commands in the Bible for a reason. So I'm going to repeat it again. Remember the things of God. As you face challenges in your life, remember. So this is how Joshua 23 starts, with an encouragement to remember. Verse 1 continues. It says, "Joshua, by then a very old man, summoned all Israel, their elders, their leaders, the judges and officials, and said to them, 'I am very old.'" Well, thank you, Joshua. I appreciate the information here. How old is Joshua? So about this time, Joshua is 110 years old. So he's not being dramatic. He is very old. Scholars have debated for quite some time how old Joshua was when he took over for Moses, right? You remember that part of the story in the very beginning of the book of Joshua. But the general consensus is this, that Moses passed the baton of leadership on to Joshua when Joshua was about 87 years old. Like, let that sink in for just a moment. Joshua had already lived almost 90 years in his life. And then probably the greatest challenge of leadership was bestowed upon him at 87. And the book of Joshua spans for about a 23-year period of time. Hence, he's 110 years old. I can do math, right? So what does this teach us? Well, amongst many other things, one of the things that it teaches us is that there is no such thing as retirement in the kingdom of heaven. Now, I'm not saying that in the cultural sense you can't retire. Certainly some of you that are watching this video right now or listening to it are retired. And there's no problem with that. I'm not saying that you can't retire from a career, from a job, or that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that God is never done working in your life. Like if you still have breath, like just in this moment, in the house communities that you're in as you're watching this, take a deep breath in, let it out. God is not done using you, right? If you still have breath in your lungs, you still have a purpose for being here. This is also a challenge and a reminder, particularly if you're younger, how you should see into the future. the questions that you're asking about your life and what your purpose is and these things, they're not just about working a career until you get to retirement. No, as a follower of Jesus, you live with a purpose that guides and transcends the unique work that you're doing. Joshua was a young man when he was the aide of Moses. We think for roughly the first 40 years of Joshua's life, he worked alongside of Moses day in and day out. He learned from Moses. He was, and this was no secret to anyone as a people of Israel, the next in line for leadership. You remember the story, sometime around 40 years old for Joshua, he and 11 other people were sent into the promised land to spy out on the land because God was going to bring them into the land and give it to them. They were the first to see it, first to see the good fruit in the land, but also the first to see the challenges that were going to be ahead of them. Now, remember, Moses had this unique relationship with God. Moses saw God face to face. Moses talked with God. He was called a friend of God. Moses was incredibly humble, and Joshua had the opportunity to learn from Moses day in and day out. So when he is sent with the spies into the land, Joshua comes back and he's like, we can do this. God is with us. Let's go. Caleb, the only other of the 12 spies, agrees. Caleb's like, I'm in. We got this. Let's go. The other 10, they give into fear. They talk about the giants that are in the land. They want to go back, not forward, back to the land of Egypt, back to a place that doesn't include the promises of God. And so the whole generation that Joshua is a part of becomes punished. And now, after 40 years or so of Joshua being shaped and molded and prepared for the leadership role of the people of Israel, he's going to spend the next 40 years of his life waiting in the wilderness, wandering for this generation that he's a part of to pass away, right? So this is what happens in his life. 40 years being prepared by Moses, 40 years then waiting and wandering, and then he has a 23-year period of time where the baton of leadership is handed and he becomes the leader of the people of God. These three stages of Joshua's life remind me of a discipleship framework that I learned years ago. It has been taught through hundreds of years of church history. Figures like St. John of the Cross or Nikos Kazantzakis, and more recently Ronald Rolheiser, they all use different language to describe the stages of discipleship, but what in essence it can be summarized in three different ways. The first is essential discipleship, the second is generative discipleship, and the third is radical discipleship. We see each of these stages of development in the life of Joshua, and I want to share them with you today because what is consistent about what God was doing and shaping and forming Joshua is consistent in how Jesus shaped and formed his disciples, which means it's consistent in how he is working through his Spirit to shape and form disciples today. So we're going to learn about this framework, talk about what each of these stages of discipleship development look like, invite you into growth, and then we're going to be done. And you guys are going to have some time to kind of discuss and talk about what this looks like. So essential discipleship can be defined this way. This is the struggle to get our lives together. This parallels the early time of Joshua's life as Moses' aide. Now, each of these stages of discipleship, they sort of naturally parallel our biology. And the reason why the systematic way of thinking about it was presented this way is because, well, we all kind of know what it's like to grow up. Like, we understand that we are born into the world and in infancy, and we grow into childhood and then into adolescence, and eventually, hopefully, everybody grows into adulthood. We understand that there's a process there of our natural biology, the way God designed us, to actually grow into maturity. We don't stay a child. We are supposed to grow. And so the same is true in discipleship unto Jesus, is that when we come to know Jesus, we start really as infants. We start with a childlike type faith. We're actually encouraged to do that by Jesus. We can't even come into the kingdom unless we do so as children. Jesus told Nicodemus that you have to be born again, born of the Spirit, to be renewed and part of the new people of God. And so there is this natural sort of process that our life goes on for us to grow into adults, but there's a same process that can be mirrored in our spiritual life as well. Now, when I say that essential discipleship is in essence the struggle to get our lives together, if you've ever raised children, you know that it can be a struggle to grow up. You know, like I said, my 4 daughters, 8, 5, 3, and 1, there is a fun and an innocence to childhood in each of them, but there also is a very real struggle to grow up. I see this especially in my 2 older kids, and they always want to be older than they are. One of my daughters turns 5 next week, but of course she already tells everybody that she's 5, right? My other daughter turns 8 like in a month. Now, the funny thing about that is that she has in her mind been 9 for a long time because they both have this desire to want to identify with being older than they are, having more responsibility, being mature. And there is something in that that isn't to be, I don't know, looked down upon. There's something in that that is part of the way God designed us to want to grow beyond where we are today. You also know that there's a struggle in growing up. It's just purely biological. Like growing pains are real. Let me tell you, teething is a real thing. The development of your internal organs and the like there's real physicality that needs to grow up to be able to house your maturity. And that is the same thing about our spirituality as well. Our souls need to grow up. They need to expand, they need to be developed, and they need to be capable of maintaining maturity. The other struggle of growing up is actually just getting your life together, right? This is typically the struggle of every young adult, which is how do I become a functioning person, right? An adult. How do I grow into maturity? Right? So while this makes sense biologically, I hope it comes into your mind in the framework of spirituality as well. You can enter into the initial stage of discipleship and never mature out of it. This is one of the great warnings of Jesus, right? Similar today, how we know many adults who act still like children, or on the more positive side, we know many young people who obtain and have maturity that we say is far beyond their years. See, the point isn't to despise where you are in your maturity in Christ, but the point is to embrace where you are and then grow. If you read the Gospels and you pay attention and read them with this sort of framework in mind, what you're going to see is that Jesus makes invitations to his disciples that gradually intensify. Like he gives them what they can handle right now, but eventually he will ask for more. Think about Peter, for example. He tells Peter, I will make you a fisher of men, right? This was an invitation that came in a way that would excite him because fishers of men were great orators and teachers, and the rabbis were thought of as fishers of men. They could speak and gather people to themselves. So this is the initial invitation of Jesus, and there's a reason why Peter throws his nets aside and is like, all right, I'm in, I'm all in. But later down the road, Jesus says, if you really want to be my disciple, you have to eat my body and drink my blood. And a lot of the people who are like maybe on the fence about following Jesus walk away. And there we find Peter again, who is there and says, Lord, to whom else shall we go? You alone are the one with the words of eternal life. So what we see is that initially there was an invitation into maturity, into following Jesus as a disciple. It was met with Peter at a place where he could understand it. Later on, the stakes get higher, and his demand of him is to grow beyond that place. See, we're not asked to stay stagnant. Jesus continues in the Gospels to invite his disciples to a deeper understanding of what it means to be fully human, what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, and what it means to follow him. Later on, a new stage would be introduced to Peter. Jesus dies, he's buried, and then he resurrects, and Jesus looks at him again, and he calls him to feed his sheep, right? It's another deeper, not selfish, but selfless call for Peter to move beyond where he is and on to the next place that Jesus has for him. This is all good news because Jesus wants us to grow, right? And growth, as we already covered, is not comfortable, but it is always for your good. I worked out at the gym today, and I was reminded as I was working out that my body tells me when I've plateaued, right? It's a regularly thing for me. I work out 4 days a week, and I have been for years. And I'll hit this point where I recognize that how far I'm running or how fast I'm running or how much I'm lifting isn't enough. If I want to grow, if I want to move beyond where I am right now, I have to up the weight, up the intensity, up the distance. That's how I grow. Now, that won't be comfortable. It'll be painful. Let me tell you, it will hurt. There'll be times that I don't want to do it. But if I want to grow, I have to embrace where I am and the challenge to continue to move on. Right? Local churches use different language for their methodology for growth, right? We have small groups and classes, and you can serve and all of these different things. But essentially, it all contains the same elements, and here's what they are. Develop Christ-like character, like become like Jesus. Examples of that: humility and patience and long-suffering and kindness and goodness. Allow your being to be reshaped by Jesus. Pray. Like, devote yourself to prayer by yourself and devote yourself to prayer with other people as well. Study God's word. Like, allow the word of God to saturate your entire being and to reshape who you are. Be devoted to the family of God or the church. Gather, as you're doing right now. Serve. Be a part. Take your gifts. Take your talents. Take the things that God has given you and give them away for the good of somebody else. Be devoted to the work of justice and mercy. God is putting the world back to rights again. That is the message, that the kingdom of God is come to the earth. That's why Jesus invited us to pray, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And I know it's easy to look at the news, it's easy to look at the state of the world and to feel like it's not happening. But if you separate yourself from the partisan agendas that are out there, the machines that are constantly trying to drive you to addiction to their programming, and step away from that for a second, and you look around and you see a deep hunger for people to know God, a deep hunger for people to be whole and to be healed. God is at work. No one is going to stop that work. He is in the business of justice and mercy, and he invites you to be a part of that, invites you into that. And then to love unconditionally. These are ways that the church often invites you to be a part of. Maybe it's in missions, or maybe it's in serving on a weekly basis, or whatever that thing may look like. The methodology may be different. At its root, these are things that have really transcended time and space, right? These are things that the church has always been up to, and I would encourage you, lean into your pastoral team, ask them questions. How can I grow? What can I be a part of in this local community of faith? Notice that I said be devoted to these things, not master, right? In this stage of discipleship, like Joshua in his early life, you are learning to embrace the role of a disciple. The word disciple literally means learner or apprentice. Essential discipleship is about learning to let the essentials, the things I just mentioned, guide your life. This is also the stage where you typically have an unrealistic but also incredibly optimistic desire to change the world, to become something great. And the same is true in our spirituality. Early on in our time with Jesus, typically we have an encounter with God that ignites a passion inside of our hearts. You've met this person if you've been around the church any shape or any period of time. You've seen them, they're young, they're passionate, they're excited, they've signed up for every event, they've served in every capacity, they believe revival is just around the corner, they enroll in the ministry institute, they burn hot, they burn fast. But unfortunately, the first sign of pain or suffering or any obstacle in the way, and now questions arise. Is God really good? Has God really made promises to me? Has he really provided the things he said he was? Did God really say that? Or did I just go too far? Maybe I made a mistake, or maybe I should take it down a notch or two and lose some of the passion. See, if you are in that place, let me encourage you. You are not experiencing a mistake, but an invitation to growth, to move on to the next stage of discipleship, as Joshua needed to move on from his first, responsibility as Moses' aide, and to move into generative discipleship, which is this: the struggle to give our lives away. This is captured in the second part of Joshua's life, as I already said. In the natural sense, this could be seen as that part of your life where you have maybe more stability. Culturally, this is what we see as that stage of life where you're married, maybe, or you're a functioning adult as a single. Maybe you have kids and a mortgage and a career. You have responsibilities and you're on the grind, right? If you're newly graduated from college and you're listening to this, one of the things you're experiencing is that you have been thrust into this next phase of your life and maturity, even if you weren't ready for it at all. Right? Up until this point in your life, largely life has been about, you. As a child, your world revolves around you. As you grow, you're discovering what track of life you want to. What do you want to do when you grow up? Who do you want to be when you grow up? You choose an educational path, if you have the privilege of doing that aligns with the things you want to do. You discover the passions that you want and how you can give them to the world, right? But what happens in your life naturally, and it happens in your journey through spirituality and discipleship, is that a shift takes place where you've spent all this time trying to get your life together, all this time to figure out who you are and where you fit in the world and what you're good at and passionate about. And the shift suddenly happens where it's no longer about you. It is about what you can do for other people, right? So you graduate this stage of life where you've spent X amount of times building up your own, identity capital. And now all of a sudden, it's like the whole game has changed, and now it's about you giving your life away for the good of others. Jesus said in Matthew 10:39, "Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it." Jesus makes it clear that while there is a stage of life and development where you're garnering up as much as you can for you, it is now time to lose that and rediscover what true life is in Jesus. So this is a stage of discipleship where it is about learning about how to give your life away, less than how to get your life together. Now let's go back to Joshua for a minute. Think about this. For 40 years, he learned directly under Moses' leadership. He was an apprentice under Moses. He carried real responsibility. There was no question who was next in line. Joshua shows unique character alongside of Caleb, right? And then the next 40 years, Joshua waits. He was ready to step into what was next. Instead, and for no fault of his own, he had to wait for 40 years. So this is consistent. It's a pattern. It's something that God does with any person that he's called to anything, right? Moses, who had his own 40 years of obscurity in the wilderness. Paul had 14 years in Arabia. David had 17 years from cave to cave. Abraham waited almost 2 decades for the promise of Isaac, his son. And, when he initially got the promise, he was over 80 years old already. Even Jesus was 30 before his ministry started, and he spent 40 days preparing in the wilderness. There's an old guy named St. John of the Cross. He lived a couple hundred years ago. He called this invitation to maturity, this invitation into the next stage of discipleship, the dark night of the soul, right? What an epic name, right? It is a season where you are actually called into the wilderness by God, called into obscurity by God. You don't know if you're going to hear the same things you heard before. You don't necessarily go with the same passion. There's a sense of duty and obligation, but it's a step into the unknown that, if embraced with joy and contentment, you begin to experience the healing that your soul deeply longs for. I remember being told that it takes almost 7 years in marriage, if you're being intentional, to begin to not think selfishly. At about that time, your instincts to think about me before you begin to shift. You become naturally more inclined, although still tempted by selfishness, to think about others, to think about your spouse in particular first. That's within the marriage context. The point being is that there is real thing called selfishness that is deep inside of us. And marriage is one of the tools God uses to root the selfishness out of us. Many marriages give up way too quickly, or they don't understand that this is the process that actually happens in your soul. And so they think something is wrong. Something is wrong. It's our selfishness. But the wrong part of your spouse calling that out and you having to learn how to work, that is not a problem, right? It can be in how it's dealt with, but if nurtured well, this is the crucible for you and for me to no longer let selfishness guide our behaviors. Children, at least for me, have put the importance of this upon me as well. I remember holding Scarlett, my oldest daughter, for the first time. Fresh into the world, this tiny little newborn baby, I would do anything for her. I would die in that very instant for her. And you know what she's done for me? Nothing. She has done absolutely nothing for me up until this point, right? Furthermore, as they grow, they continue to sap the life out of you, right? And at the same time, and in a strange way that you can only understand if you fully embrace this, is this. They also energize you at the same time. Because when you realize what God is doing, He is using this amazing gift as a child to uproot the selfishness, the self-centeredness out of my life, to teach me selflessness and to teach me the way of Jesus. You know, in monasteries, there's a practice that a bell will ring, and whatever the monk or the nun, whoever is at the monastery, whatever they are doing, they have to stop what they're doing at that very moment. Set it down. Doesn't matter how important it is, whatever it is, they stop it in that very movement and they move on to the next task. This is it's an intentional opportunity for spiritual formation. The point is to remind you that time is the Lord's, as is the work that you are doing. So it becomes a crucible for discipleship because you have to let go of control and allow God to work through our felt need to control everything. I realized this at one point that my kids are like monastery bells, right? They ring all the time. And oftentimes, at times in the god-awful hours of the night when I don't want the bell to ring and I have to stop whatever I'm doing, like sleep, and I have to tend to their needs. And once I realized that God wanted to use my home as a primary place of a crucible for spiritual formation for me, and I realized that the cries of my children in the middle of the night were an opportunity for me to become more like Jesus, I leaned in instead of resist. Instead of getting, and this took time, trust me, and there was a lot of painful lessons along the way, but instead of getting frustrated at my children, I began to slowly change in those moments and pray, God, what are you teaching me? What are you trying to shape in me? And the common thread was heard over and over and over again. I'm teaching you how to give your life away. Right? And as my kids have gotten older, there's all sorts of opportunities for career success and advancement and opportunities to meet with people and interesting opportunities to speak and all of that. And then there's the dance recital at the same time. And I have to really wrestle with, God, what did you call me to? There's only one unique thing in my life that no one else can do, and that is to be, I guess it's two, to be a parent to my children and to be a husband to my wife. Anyone else can do what I'm doing right now. They can be a pastor of even in Foursquare Church. They can do a lot of different things, but no one can take this responsibility from me while there's breath in my lungs. And so when these other things compete with that, what is God reminding me? He is reminding me to give my life away, to entrust Him with what is best and most important, and to let everything else out of my control. See, this stage of discipleship is learning how to embrace giving your life away, serving others that they may never serve you back, loving unconditionally, And following Jesus has never been about obtaining your best life now of prosperity. And this is a season of your life where you begin to discover that. Right. So we learn in this that we are dearly loved children of God. So much so that there are times, like in this stage of discipleship, where the lessons that must be learned can be painful. Right? But this isn't where it ends, right? It moves on, and we see this in Joshua's life as well. And as we wrap up the message, this is kind of where we're going to land the plane. We have essential discipleship, generative discipleship, and finally, radical discipleship. And this can be defined as the struggle to give our deaths away, right? So this is the last stop of our destination. Joshua has come to the end of his life. He spent 110 years of his life learning to put his life together and give his life away. And this final chapter is his speech. This is how he has given his death away. One theologian summarizes this stage of life, and I'm going to read you this quote because it's long and it's big, but he wrote it much better than I could say it. So I'm just going to read it to you. Radical discipleship and the struggle to give our death away is the final stage of life. As Christians, we believe that Jesus lived for us and that he died for us, and he gave us both his life and his death. But we often fail to distinguish that there are two clear and separate movements here. Jesus gave his life for us in one movement, and he gave his death for us in another. He gave his life for us through his activity, through his generative actions for us, and he gave his death through us through his passivity, through absorbing in love the helplessness, diminutions, humiliations, and loneliness of dying. Like Jesus, we too are meant to give our lives away in generosity and selflessness. But we are also meant to leave this planet in such a way that our diminishment and death is our final and perhaps greatest gift to the world. Needless to say, that's not easy. Walking in discipleship behind the Master will require you to eventually sweat blood and feel the stone's throw from everyone. This struggle to give our deaths away, as we once gave our lives away, constitutes as radical discipleship. So this last and final stage of discipleship, it's about surrender. It's acknowledging that our hands are fully in the lives of Jesus. But it's also about legacy. What we leave behind in the stories of our life, the stories of faith and the resources and the things that we have done become a gift, a sad one because it's in death, but also one of joy if it is given well. It's a gift to the people of this world, a gift that introduces people at our death to the goodness of who God is in their life. Joshua ends chapter 23 in this way. Now I am about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and your soul, not one of all of the good promises the Lord your God has given you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed. But just as all the good things the Lord your God promised you have come to you, so he will bring you all the evil things he has threatened until the Lord your God has destroyed you from the good land he has given you. If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you. Final words of Joshua. He is presenting his whole life to them and saying, God has been faithful. You can trust him. Look at my life. Look at the heritage of faith that I've been a part of. Give your life fully to him, and he will carry you, right? And it's also a stern warning. See, this is one of the things about people towards the end of their life is they can say whatever they want and get away with it, right? He says, hey, by the way, there is another way, and it does not lead to life. Trust me. This is the gift that I'm going to give you. If you do, it will not work out well for you. But he has earned the trust through his own journey of the people of God for these words to be spoken because his death has become a gift to them. There's 3 prayers that can be summarized this whole teaching. There was a man named Nikos Kasantkis who summarized discipleship in these 3 stages this way. It's a poem and it's a prayer for each stage. And I want to invite you to allow the words to seep into your soul. What do you identify with? Again, there's no problem if you're in any of these stages, but recognize where you identify with and ask God to speak to you about how to grow, how to continue to become who God has made you to be. The first line and the first prayer is this: I am a bow in your hands. Lord, draw me lest I rot. Right? In this poem, what we see is a desire to be used according to the way you have been fashioned. I am ready, God. Put me to work. I am ready. Put me out there, Lord. I want to move forward. That is this prayer. The next, which encapsulates the next generative discipleship, giving your life away. Do not overdraw me, Lord, for I shall break. This is that idea that you are now being spent for the good of other people. At one stage of your life, you desired to be used regularly over and over again. And now you're at the stage of your life where you're like, I'm done. You've used me too much. I'm tired. And that leads to the next. Overdraw me, Lord, and who cares if I break? This is that radical discipleship, the recognizing that there is a gift in learning how to give your death away. This is when inside of your very soul you realize that true life can be only found in the giving of your life, surrendering it to Jesus, only to find it new again. And if that means that you have to overdraw me so that I break, I submit, because that alone is where life is found. We have a tradition here at B4 Church where we do this thing called a benediction. It's a prayer of blessing. And I don't know if this is a regular part of what you do or not, but I wanted to offer it as a gift to you as I part ways with you this morning. And this is all you have to do if you would like. You just simply open up your hands. This is a physical representation of what is happening inside of your soul if you let it, which is, I receive. It's a humble position. Instead of clenching our fists and holding on to the control, it's just simply an open hand. Okay, God, I receive whatever gift you want to give me. So if you would be willing, in wherever you are watching this, whether you're with your community in home, or whether you're catching up someplace and you're on the bus or on the Max, or you're driving in your car, do it with one eye open if you are, and one hand on the steering wheel. But if you'd be willing to open your hands, I'd like to pray a blessing over you. May you be a people committed to growth. May you be a people who go on the long and hard journey of getting your lives together, essential discipleship, by the grace of Jesus. May you be a people who travel into the unknown, the wilderness, and the wandering with joy and wholeheartedness, because you know that God is doing a good work in you. And may you be a people that live with a purpose, knowing that your death can be a gift to the world around you, pointing people to Jesus. Amen.